Today we are not only going to be talking about the death card faction focus, the data cards and so on, but we are also going to talk at least a little bit about the 10th edition rules that have leaked. I think today in the morning or yesterday in the evening, I have no idea, but they leaked. They are going to be linked down in the pinned comment below if you want to check them out for yourself. And yeah, that is it. If you enjoyed the content, consider leaving a thumbs up and subscribing, as well as checking the links down in the description below if you want to support me over on Patreon, if you want to join us over on Discord, or if you want to follow on Twitter for updates. And yeah, my name is Deepesh, and this is Empire of Wargames. So today is a very weird day. First up, a lot of rules for 10th edition have leaked. Admittedly, most of them are very simple. The first couple of pages that you will be able to see on Imager, that is going to be linked down below, as I said, is how charging over terrain works, how basic movement works, how basic shooting works, and everything is to a T what you expect, trust me. The only thing that is kind of interesting is consolidation, where it is base to base and not an inch within an inch, which is kind of better and more elegant, especially considering that there are huge bases, just something that I found interesting. Then they explain data sheets and they explain basic weapon profiles and data cards. They explain what Scout does. Scout is basically you can make a normal move up to X because it is Scout 6, for example. Infiltrators are exactly what you expect. It is you can deploy them anywhere on the battlefield that is 9 or more inches horizontally from the enemy deployment zone. Super simple. Stratagems. The green ones you can use in either player's turn, blue ones in your turn, red ones in your opponent's turn. Very simple as well. And then there are a couple of cool stratagems. Grenades have been explained. You roll 66, and for every 4+ that enemy unit that you've targeted suffers 1 mortal wound. And there is the same for tanks that are in melee. You roll d6s equal to your strength characteristic, and if you roll higher on that d6 than your opponent's toughness is, that many mortal wounds are going to get applied. Super cool rules, super cool stratagems, so check them out. The rest is exactly what you expect. Smoke screen, heroic intervention, and so on is just what you expect. They've also explained how ranged attacks work, obviously, and they've explained stealth. Stealth is just -1 to hit for your opponents to hit roll, so exactly what we expected, and that makes Bellacor's data card a little bit confusing at that point because everything is still kept to +1 and -1. So you cannot exceed that, which then again means that most of your ballistic skill 4 armies cannot in fact turn some of their heavy weapons into ballistic skill 2, no matter what you do, at least from what I understand so far. Interesting to get that confirmation. Saving throws, exactly what you expect. Inflicting damage, feel no pain is the same. Deadly demise is the exploding thing in a ball. It is just how many mortal wounds you deal if you roll a 6. So your unit dies, you roll a 1d6, on a 6 deadly demise triggers, and within 6 inches you deal 1d6 mortal wounds. Or whatever your deadly demise says, that we've seen stronger deadly demises already. Then it says assault, ignore cover, and so on. Super simple, super exactly what we expect. I'm going to just speedrun through this. Indirect fire, melter, precision is exactly what we expected it to be. Precision is just whenever you shoot at a unit, you can allocate damage to a character model. Very useful, and this is going to be the sniper rule basically. Then they explained hazardous. Each time you use a hazardous weapon, after you resolve your attacks, roll 1d6. On a 1, your model blows up, and if it's a character, monster, or vehicle, it suffers 3 mortal wounds instead. Very simple, very straightforward. I personally really like this rule. Everything else is exactly what we expected. Charge phase, exactly what we expected, and that is already it. So you can check out all the rules for yourself. They've been leaked. There's surprisingly not a lot of interesting stuff in here. Most of it I covered in my quick speed run, so there is that. If you have any questions regarding these rules, or if you want to discuss them in the comments, please feel free to just drop your questions and your opinions on the leaked rules down there as well. Next up, we are going to talk about the Death Guard army preview, and we went from one of the most exciting and strongest ones with Eldari to one of the weakest ones and most disappointing ones out of all of them for the Death Guard. That is just my teaser for you right now. So let's go over why that is and why I think that the Death Guard one is just one of the weakest ones out there. If you look at the army rule, this is just kind of the gift of contagion rule that we had previously in 9th edition, and it spreads a little bit quicker and stays at its maximum range for longer. That is great. Reducing the toughness by 1 is basically an offensive buff, but it kind of fits this defensive army because, you know, you're reducing toughness because you're spreading sickness, so it makes sense. You're starting at 3 inches on the first battle round, and it stays on 9 inches on the last battle round. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's a character or two, maybe Mortarion, who can increase the range even further to 12 inches. But we are going to have to wait and see. For now, this army rule is decent, but the army rule not being disgustingly resilient, what is actually the core component of a Death Guard army, its key part is being indestructible, and it is also what is always described in the lore, in the books and so on, that they are just able to take a punch, and it is not the case anymore. Instead, they get an offensive buff at a very short range that has lost most of its value in the current edition. Yes, most of the infantry is obviously still T4, T3, and it is going to be strong against them, but as soon as you look at vehicles, this kind of ability lost a lot of steam, because previously, if you walked up to a Land Raider and it was T8 and it was suddenly T7, it's just a huge difference at that point. But if you walk up to a Land Raider now and reduce T12 to T11, that just depends on your weapons, and it's not going to have nearly the same effect because the toughness variability is just way higher in the current edition. So this ability to be effective should have been -2 toughness for vehicles or something and -1 for infantry. The way it is written here is just super simple, admittedly, but also very lazy. And that's why I don't like this rule at all, and it should have been disgustingly resilient here. Yeah. As I said, the armor rule is not bad, but if we take a look at the Death Guard weapons, it gets even worse. So let's take a look at that. But before we do that, we obviously have to talk about the Detachment rule, which is called Spread the Sickness. This is just sticky objectives that generate a contagion range. That's it. So you have a sticky objective whenever you stand with a unit that has this ability on an objective, and then you can move away. And not only are you holding that objective, but also whenever an opponent moves onto the objective, it gets -1 toughness, at least for as long as you technically still hold the objective. So that is strong. It has its use cases, but this is usually a strong ability for an army that is fast and quick. And if we are going to look at the data cards down below, this army is not fast, and this is no spoiler or anything. But sticky objectives on a very slow army is a little bit weird. It doesn't synergize that well. And the gift of contagion on an objective is going to have very limited use cases because it just goes away as soon as your opponent was able to hold the objective and seize it from you, because it reads while the objective marker is infected and under your control. So you need to tick both of those boxes, and you don't tick one of them as soon as your opponent basically captures the objective from you. So yeah, Spread the Sickness is just not very fitting for the army. Sticky objectives is technically speaking always useful, don't get me wrong, but we are getting sticky objective way too widely spread across 10th edition, that's for one. And the other thing is that, yeah, just it doesn't make too much sense on a slow army, and the gift of contagion spreading across an objective that you're holding is a nice to have, but it's not nearly as strong as you might possibly think it is, because it's just not. So yeah, it should have been disgustingly resilient as the army rule, and the -1 toughness aura as the detachment rule. That would have been way better, made the army way more sense, and it just fits the Death Guard way better than whatever we have here now. Then when we look at the data cards, you can see that with disgustingly resilient missing, there's no fear, no pain, no -1 damage, no nothing. And they are hyping this data card up in specific. So what the text below the data card reads is toughness 6, 2-up save, 4-up invulnerable save. What a bloated banquet of resilience. But in all reality, you're losing movement and you're losing disgustingly resilient, and all you're getting is 1 toughness in addition. That's it. That's all you're getting. And you know what the funniest thing is? That you're getting lethal wounds on all your plague weapons that previously had the plague ability. And you know what lethal hits kind of circumvents? Your aura of contagion, your -1 toughness, because lethal hits means on critical hits, you ignore the wound roll. So you don't care about toughness at that point. Do you see the synergies? Do you see the design? The pure intent of the designer here. It's just funny. It's just funny to me. All the previous previews have been so kind of dialed in and cool, even though the Eldar might be a little bit similar to the Sisters. But it made sense for their faction. You could explain it via the lore and so on. And everything synergized so nicely. And this is just a clown fiesta. I don't know how else to explain it personally. It's just I think it's really bad. So yeah, you're losing movement, you're getting 1 additional toughness, you're sitting at a 2+ save at 3 wounds, leadership 6, which is admittedly very solid, and an OC of 1. The Blight Launcher has the aforementioned lethal hits at 6 -1 2, so very standard with 2 attacks. The combi weapon is the same across all the armies, it seems. Combi Bolter is just a bolter with lethal hits because it's still a plague weapon with rapid fire 2. Very basic. Plague Spewer is just an anti-infantry 2 weapon, which is admittedly very, very strong. And at AP -1, you might even be able to deliver some of that damage. So I'm a big fan of the Plague Spewer here, a strong weapon. And then we have the Reaper Autocannon, which is an autocannon with another different stat profile. This one doesn't deal 3 damage compared to the previous autocannons we've saw, but instead has devastating wounds and sustained hits 1 at 4 attacks. So it doesn't deal as much damage, it's not as effective against Terminators, but it is still an infantry destroying machine. So what you have with your Blightlord Terminators is a lot of anti-infantry and maybe some anti-elite infantry, but it stops there, kind of. You're not going to hurt any vehicles with your weapons, simply because while you have lethal hits, and yes, you're going to lower toughness, you just don't have the AP to deliver the damage you have. Most vehicles we've seen so far have a save of 2 up, and AP -1 is just not enough to reliably get that damage through. So there's that. When we look at the weapons, we have the Bubotic Blade, which is going to be on most of your Blightlord Terminators. Those are just 4 attacks, which is a lot, admittedly. And weapon skill 3, strength 5, AP -2, damage 1. So you're basically retaining your AP, but you have a lower strength than you had previously. Previously it was strength 6, so it's a double nerf, considering the toughness of most of the things is going up. Furthermore, obviously you don't have the access between choosing between a sword and whatever else you had. You had a different weapon. What was it? A sword and axe. That is not the case anymore. You have to pick one Bubotic Blade weapon, and it is the same profile, which is a little bit sad because it kind of reduces options. And the Flail of Corruption is 6 attacks at weapon skill 3, 5 -1 2. So the Flail of Corruption previously had a slightly different profile. It had a higher AP, but everything else is basically the same, and you made the same number of attacks at 6. So not too much of a change here. Strength 5 is now weaker than it was previously, so that is also a nerf. Everything else was retained. The AP has received also a nerf, which was previously AP -2. So all in all, the Flail of Corruption and the weapons in melee are also nerfed. So everything we've seen so far is just flat out weaker, including the base stat line and including the abilities. What you have, though, is the Deep Strike ability, which is separate from reinforcements, because you can just Deep Strike anywhere on the battlefield, 9 inches away from your opponent, so it's just way better. You have Nurgle's Gift Aura, which makes sense. You have a 4-up invulnerable save, makes sense. And then you have Blistering Fusillade, which reads each time a model in this unit makes a ranged attack, if it targets the closest eligible enemy unit, reroll a wound roll of 1. This is a nice to have. This is very reminiscent of the previous plague weapons, and it adds a lot of the killiness, but considering that most of your ranged weapons have lethal hits, it's kind of weird, actually. It kind of synergizes well in the point that your Nurgle units are going to be pretty reliable when it comes to getting your weapons through the wounding step. So that is a nice to see. But pairing that together with lethal hits and with the contagion aura is just weird. The entire design seems off and nothing seems to quite work the way I would have liked it to. So the Blightlord Terminators are a disappointment. That's what I'm going to say. Are they a little bit tougher than your regular Terminators? I guess they are. They have 1 point higher toughness. But that's about it. That's about it. Next up, we are talking about the Malignant Playcaster, which is a movement 5 unit at T5, save 3 up, 4 wounds, a leadership of 6, and an OC of 1. So very similar to what it was before. The leadership went up a little bit in relation to the edition we are looking at. The movement is the same, so I think the Malignant Playcaster is not only here to show us what a Death Guard Cycle looks like, but also what a regular Plague Marine looks like, and you're not getting any additional toughness for your regular Plague Marine. So while your Blightlord Terminators at least got an additional toughness, your regular Plague Marines not only are losing disgustingly resilient, but they are also not getting anything in return. At least that's what it seems like. I'm sure GW is going to come around with an ability that is something like, as long as you hold an objective and you're within contagion range of a different unit or something, you're going to get +1 toughness. But that conditional additional durability sucks. It's just not great design. But we're going to have to wait and see. That was just me spewing out ideas. When we look at the Malignant Playcaster, we have here the regular bolt pistol, which is exactly what you expect. And then we have our psychic spells. We have Plague Wind Witchfire, which is just not in a hazardous or overloaded state, which is a d6 attacks. Those automatically hit because of the torrent ability at 4 minus 1d3. Super solid stat line against basic Space Marines. Anything that is toughness 3, this is going to be even better. And yeah, solid stat line. And the Plague Wind focused is basically what we've seen yesterday with the Psychic Storm from the Farseer, but with a shorter range, more attacks, but instead you have the hazardous rule, which you need to pay attention to. But other than that, it is 6 minus 2d3, so it is perfect for elite infantry, and you're going to throw that into Terminators and so on. So pretty solid, although the range here is definitely shorter. Then we have the Corrupted Staff, which is lethal hits and psychic. So again, for your attacks on a hit roll of 6, you're skipping the wound step and you're wounding automatically at 6 minus 1d3. This one was previously 7 minus 1d3. So it is weaker in all aspects. That is basically what the melee weapon says. It is the same weapon with just a weaker profile. Then we have Nurgle's Gift and the leader ability, so you're probably going to be able to put the Malignant Playcaster into almost any Plague Marine unit. I don't see why you wouldn't be able to add it to a squad of Terminators or regular Plague Marines or Poxwalkers or anything. I don't think the Malignant Playcaster is going to be limited too much there. When we look at the psychic abilities, we have the Gift of Contagion. In your shooting phase, you can select one enemy unit within 18 inches and visible of the Psyker, roll 1d6. On a 1, the Psyker suffers d3 mortal wounds. On a 2 up, until the start of your next shooting phase, each time a model in that enemy unit makes a melee attack, subtract 1 from the wound roll. Very effective, especially considering that your Gift of Contagion or your Nurgle's Gift aura requires you to be very close to your opponent, so that is a very useful ability, and -1 to wound on a T6 Blightlord unit is going to be very, very annoying to deal with, that I admit, so that is a strong ability that I think is going to see a lot of play. And then Pestilent Fallout. In your shooting phase, after this model has shot, if one or more of those attacks made with this Plague Wind scored a wound against an enemy infantry unit, until the start of your next turn, subtract 2 from that unit's move characteristic and subtract 2 from the advance and charge rolls made from that unit. So if you stack both of Gift of Contagion and the Pestilent Fallout on the same unit, you're kind of griefing yourself, because Gift of Contagion only applies to melee attacks, and if you then apply Pestilent Fallout on the same unit, that unit is less likely to get into melee. So you kind of need to spread that out, which I would have liked it to be a little bit more of a synergy type of thing, where you might debuff your opponent's unit and buff your own instead of debuffing 2 of your opponent's units, and those technically would be better off if you separate the 2 psychic abilities on 2 different units, but I guess it's fine. All you need to do technically to apply this is to cast your Plague Wind on a different unit and you're going to be fine. But the problem here is the Gift of Contagion only has a range of 18 inches and your Plague Wind, even worse, has a range of 12 inches. So everything needs to be very nearby for your Malignant Playcaster to do anything. And that is a little bit, it is annoying to deal with, especially considering your movement is below average. Movement 5 is not absolutely terrible or anything, but it's definitely not great if you are also pairing Movement 5 with shorter range. I'm sure most Leagues of Votann players could tell you a thing or two about this one. So yeah, the Malignant Playcaster, while being the better data card, no doubt, the psychic abilities are okay. The weapons across the board are not that great. The psychic spell is strong, especially the focused one, but the melee weapon took a hit. A basic bolt pistol is just not worth a mention. And the psychic abilities have very, very limited range for a unit that is also very slow. So it seems like you're going to put all of your Death Guard into Rhinos and hope for the best. That is what I'm reading out of this specific data card. I think the Malignant Playcaster is not bad, but needs help in the movement department. And yeah, other than that, it's okay, but nothing to write home about. Next up, we have the Weapon Spotlight. And no, the GW weird choices for the Death Guard don't change here. The Weapon Spotlight is another one of those. If you look at the Plague Burst Mortar, it has the Blast rule, which means for every 5 models in your opposing unit, you're getting +1 attack. So if you're attacking 30 Orc Boys, you're getting d6 +9 attacks at that point. Indirect fire means you don't have to see your opponent's unit, but they are getting all the benefits of cover. Lethal hits means you're skipping the wound step, which is just great. And yeah, the range is 48 inches, which was previously also 48 inches. The attacks go up to d6 plus 3, which was previously just d6. And the ballistic skill is the same. And the strength is the same, which is a huge nerf in 10th edition. The AP went down by 1 and the damage is 2. So what this turned to is, previously it was an anti-vehicle weapon, and it is now an anti-elite infantry at best. And it is a massive change. I'm not sure why I would bring a huge tank, and the only huge tank in your entire army, to deal with elite infantry when I have elite infantry myself that can deal with that type of unit. I'm not sure what the thought process here was and how the test games worked for GW, but it is weird. It just doesn't make too much sense. Yes, technically speaking, your Plague Burst crawler has additional weapons that are also going to be anti-vehicle, like the Entropy Cannon and so on. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely understand those exist. But the Plague Burst mortars should be something like a strength 12 weapon or something, to at least be able to wound a Rhino on a 4-up or a 3-up or something. And the way it is currently, you're wounding a Rhino that is not within contagion range of anything on a 5 with the mortar, which is just weird. It doesn't make too much sense, at least in my opinion. And then at least the Plague Burst mortar, and this kind of cements it more as an anti-infantry weapon, you're getting spore-laced shockwaves, which is just, if you hit with your Plague Burst mortar, no matter if you deal damage or not, that infantry unit has to make a battle shock test, which is a great rule. Makes a lot of sense. Would have been cooler to see on a heavy slugger or something that is also on the on the basically chassis of the Plague Burst crawler. Yeah, I'm just confused about the design of this one. I'm just baffled by what the idea here was. They've tested all the units, I understand that. I've not played 10th edition, I get that as well. But there's also no explanation anywhere from the designers, and especially the data cards and the rules here would have just required a long, like a page-long explanation on what the idea here is and why they went the way they did. Because I'm somewhat sure they didn't just do it because it's funny, but because they tested it and it kind of worked out better that way. But for me, as a person who just doesn't have the entire context, just seems bad. It just seems and weird that the huge ass mortar cannon is not an anti-vehicle weapon. It just doesn't make sense to me, but And then we have a stratagem, which is Zanguo's Flux. I think that's how you pronounce it. It is a fight phase stratagem for 1 CP. You select 1 Death Guard unit from your army, and you gain the Sustained Hits 1 ability for weapons equipped by models in that unit. And if you are within an objective marker that is infected, you're getting Sustained Hits 2. So this is very strong, a great stratagem, a huge force multiplier, and not only getting lethal hits at that point on most of your attacks, but also getting Sustained Hits 2 at times is strong. So yeah, this one is easy to read, easy to understand. The intent here is clear because most of your weapons, if they're Plague or not, have very low AP. So being able to deliver more attacks is just decent, at least. So yeah, the stratagem, nothing to complain about here. Now, what I usually skip is the word from the design studio, because most of the design intention is absolutely clear for most of the armies. I'm not going to do that here, so let's go over that together. The Death Guard are a faction long renowned for their undying resolve to spread Nurgle's gifts to any and all, says Scott from the Warhammer studio. We've kept this ideal firmly in mind when designing the Death Guard. And the army rule Nurgle's gift reduces their opponent's toughness characteristic with an ever-growing range as the battle grinds on. This can often be the difference between life and death in an edition where we see some of the toughest enemies the 41st Millennium has to offer. That doesn't make sense at all. The higher the numbers go, the less effective a -1 is. The -1 previously in 9th edition had way more impact because the numbers were all lower. Now the numbers go up to 14, maybe even higher, and so a -1 there doesn't make any change at all for most of your weapons. As we've seen with the Plague Crawler or the Plague Burst Crawler weapon, a -1 on a Toughness 14 vehicle is just nothing. It's as if it wasn't an army rule at that point. So that doesn't make sense. It's just weird reasoning. That the logic that they are going with is, we have tougher units in the game, so getting them -1 toughness is super good suddenly, but the logic is reversed. Higher toughness means -1 is less effective. Keep that in mind. Then it says, despite all of Nurgle's grandeur, the one thing his devout followers lack is a sense of speed. But to make up for this, the Plague Company Detachment rule, which will mean that Death Guard forces can move away from objectives safe in the knowledge that they will remain under their control unless their foes can reclaim them. Backed up with this, some of the toughest units in the game and the lethal hits weapon ability common to many of their units, these corrupted Space Marines can overcome even the hardiest of opponents. No, they cannot. Lethal hits, as I said, doesn't kind of synergize at all with the army rule, and even if you get through the wounding step, your AP sucks across almost all of your weapons. Then, for slow armies, sticky objectives just don't make a lot of sense. Yes, I can move away from the objective, which is all nice and dandy. On turn 3, my opponent can just throw on reinforcements in my deployment zone, because I've moved away, put them on my objective, and then I'm going to have to slowly turn around and run back. I don't see how this is good at all. So the designer's word here doesn't help. It just actually makes things worse, because it seems that maybe they are not quite getting where they want to go with Death Guard. So yeah, this was a very special, a very different, and a very ranty video. I apologize for that. I play Death Guard myself. I really love the Death Guard, and I've painted a ton of their models, and I feel very strongly about this army. It is, in my opinion, one of the coolest concepts to have very tough, very elite units and make them even tougher. It is just something I personally like as a design language. I personally like bricks as a design language and tough things. Unkillable stuff. I don't like removing models from the battlefield. And that was what Death Guard was previously, but they are not that any longer. And that is something that is just annoying for me personally. So, even though this was ranty, if you stuck around for 27 minutes, thank you so much. If you have any opinions on this army at all, if you disagree with me or something, just keep it civil, drop it down in the comments below. I've thrown a lot of stuff at the designers here, but it just feels like a non-cohesive army where nothing synergizes and nothing makes sense. And I want him to understand that. I'm not super rude about anything. I think it was a little bit ranty, admittedly, but I think most of the stuff I said was constructive. I've offered different ideas for most of the stuff, especially when it comes to the army and the detachment rule, which would have been easy to fix. How is the Death Guard with the return of the Feel No Pain rule, which they've said that Feel No Pain is back and so on, how is the Death Guard here without any Feel No Pain? And even if Mortarion is giving Feel No Pain to units around him, it is way too limited. It should be an army-wide rule. It is just something so core and so essential to the army that I don't get it. So yeah, that is all I'm going to say. Thank you so much for watching. Tomorrow is going to be a different army. Did they mention which one it's going to be? Yep, it is Imperial Knight. So return tomorrow, subscribe for more content. And yeah, thank you so much for sticking through. I hope this was insightful in any case. And yeah, thanks so much for watching. Take care.